June 1940. France has fallen. The Nazi war machine, unstoppable until now, stands across the English Channel. Britain, the last free nation in Western Europe, stands alone. Prime Minister Winston Churchill declares, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender." But behind those words, there is fear. Britain's army has been driven from Dunkirk. The only thing standing between Hitler and invasion is the Royal Air Force. The Luftwaffe prepares for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. Before the ships can cross, the skies must be conquered. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. July 10th, 1940. The first German bombers appear over the Channel. Their targets, British convoys, radar stations, and airfields. The Luftwaffe believes the RAF will fall within weeks. Waves of Messerschmitt Bf-1, Onisins, and Heinkel, He-1011's bombers sweep across southern England. The British radar network, called Chain Home, gives early warning, a revolutionary system that allows RAF fighters to intercept before bombs fall. On the ground, men and women of Fighter Command watch the skies, tracking enemy aircraft with maps and phones. Every day, the air war grows more intense. Britain's survival now depends on young pilots, most barely out of their teens, flying Spitfires and Hurricanes into battle. They were called the Few. Young men from Britain, Poland, Canada, New Zealand, even Czechoslovakia, came together to defend the skies. Most were barely 20 years old. They flew 2, sometimes 3 missions a day. When they landed, they were exhausted, covered in oil and smoke. Some never returned at all. At night, they would sit quietly in wooden chairs, waiting for dawn, knowing they might not see another sunset. The sound of engines above became the sound of life and death. In those days, the future of Britain rested on their shoulders. By September 1940, the skies over Britain burned every night. Hitler had failed to destroy the RAF, so he changed his strategy from airfields to cities. It was the beginning of the Blitz. London, Coventry, Liverpool. One by one, they became targets. Civilians slept underground in subway stations, holding their children as bombs fell above. The air was filled with sirens, fire, and fear. Firefighters worked without rest, pulling people from ruins, facing the same danger as the soldiers. But even as the city burned, London stood. The people refused to surrender. Churchill said it best, "We can take it." By October 1940, the tide began to turn. The German Luftwaffe was stretched thin. Their losses were growing, and their pilots were exhausted. Meanwhile, Britain's radar stations gave early warnings of every attack. The Royal Air Force began to anticipate enemy movements, striking first instead of reacting. Young pilots, some barely 20 years old, were flying up to 5 missions a day. They called themselves the Few. Their courage and skill changed the course of the war. Every downed German bomber was a message to Hitler. Britain would not fall. By the end of October, the Luftwaffe began to withdraw. The Battle of Britain had turned, and with it, the future of the free world. When the bombs began to fall, Britain didn't just fight in the skies. It fought in hearts and minds. Radios became weapons of morale. The steady voice of Winston Churchill echoed through every home. "We shall never surrender." Newspapers printed stories of courage, of mothers rescuing their children from burning homes, of milkmen and bus drivers returning to work as if nothing had happened. Even humor survived. Londoners joked that Hitler's bombers were just giving them a new view of the sky. In the darkness of blackout nights, families gathered around dim candles, reading letters from soldiers far away. The Blitz spirit was not just bravery. It was endurance, unity, and a quiet defiance. Britain discovered a truth. Courage was not only found on the battlefield, but also in the calm heartbeat of everyday life. Britain's victory in the Battle of Britain wasn't luck. It was the triumph of technology and intelligence. In 1940, radar was still a secret weapon, known as chain home. It could detect enemy aircraft long before they reached the coast. For the first time in history, air defense was guided by science. In small, hidden bunkers, operators watched blips on glowing screens and sent instant radio messages to fighter squadrons waiting nearby. The pilots who took off in Spitfires and Hurricanes were brave, but the invisible network behind them was just as vital. At Bletchley Park, a team of mathematicians and codebreakers, including the brilliant Alan Turing, worked around the clock, deciphering German messages encrypted by the Enigma machine. Every decoded signal meant saved lives. Every innovation turned the tide. Britain had learned how to fight smarter, not just harder. By the autumn of 1940, the tide of war was beginning to turn. The Luftwaffe had lost more than 2,000 aircraft. German pilots were exhausted, flying long missions across the Channel, while British defenders fought above their own homes. Hitler grew impatient. Frustrated by the RAF's resilience, he changed his strategy once again, ordering massive night raids on cities instead of airfields. It was a fatal mistake. With less pressure on their bases, British pilots recovered, aircraft factories caught up with production, and radar gave them early warning of every attack. By October, it was clear. Germany could not achieve air superiority over Britain. Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's plan to invade England, was postponed indefinitely. Britain had survived. The Battle of Britain became the first major defeat of Nazi Germany, and a message to the world that Hitler's war machine was not invincible. Before dawn, the airfields were silent. Just the sound of boots on wet grass and engines coughing to life. Every pilot had their own ritual. A quiet cigarette, a letter folded in a pocket, a glance at the horizon that might be their last. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? You just flew, and hoped today wouldn't be the day you vanished into smoke. The sky was a strange place, beautiful and deadly at the same time. Clouds could hide you or betray you. The sun could blind you just long enough for someone else to end your story. When they landed, if they landed, there was no celebration, only relief. Another hour alive, another chance tomorrow. History remembers victories. But the men who fought it, they only remembered the silence after the radio went dead. When the missions ended, the sky wasn't the only thing that felt empty. They came back to barracks that still smelled of fuel and smoke, where yesterday's laughter echoed against today's silence. Sometimes, a bed stayed untouched, a reminder that someone didn't make it home. They never talked about it. You just noticed the absence. One less voice in the mess hall, one less name on the flight list. Letters arrived with no one to read them. Photographs stayed folded in pockets, faces frozen in moments that no longer existed. At night, some stared at the ceiling, replaying dogfights in their minds. The flash of a Messerschmitt, the sound of tearing metal, the scream in the headset before the static took over. And yet, at dawn, they rose again. They shaved, they drank their tea, they smiled. Because war didn't stop for grief. It just moved on, and so did they.